Welcome to Project Blackwood.
We have an absolute mountain of material spread out on the table today. If you are joining us and sifting through this file, I actually want you to start by looking at two very specific pieces of paper.
Yeah.
We've got them pinned up on opposite ends of the board, and they represent a contrast so severe that it almost defies basic economic gravity.
I've got the first one right here on the left side of the board. It's a weathered financial ledger. The date is 1996.
Right.
The company listed is called EuroPro. They are a regional, family-funded distributor operating out of Montreal, Canada.
And look at what they're actually selling.
Right. I'm pulling the inventory manifests from this era, and it's mostly just basic outsourced steam presses.
Ironing systems.
Exactly. Ironing systems.
Yeah.
The kind of generic domestic appliances you might see advertised in the back of some mail-order catalog.
Yeah.
For their first full fiscal year on record, the net sales figure sitting at the very bottom of this ledger is barely $1 million.
1 million.
In the context of the global appliance market in the mid-90s, that is a statistical rounding error. They are functionally invisible.
Completely invisible. Now, I want you to walk with me over to the far right side of the board, the present day. We are looking at fiscal year 2025.
Okay.
This exact same corporate lineage, which is now operating under the name SharkNinja, has mutated into an absolute apex predator.
It's wild.
The numbers in these recent Securities and Exchange Commission filings, they are difficult to fully process when you remember that $1 million starting point. Look at the net sales.
$6.399 billion.
$6.4 billion, essentially, with corporate gross margins hovering at an incredibly healthy 49%.
49% on hardware? That's absurd.
It is. They have an intellectual property arsenal containing over 5,500 patents. They completely dominate 38 distinct product subcategories across 38 global markets.
Right.
They have effectively hollowed out the untouchable dominance of legacy appliance giants. And they've pushed premium robotics hardware companies to the absolute brink of financial collapse.
So the fundamental mystery that we need you to help us untangle today is twofold. First, how does a quiet, family-funded Canadian importer, utilizing late-night television infomercials, somehow swallow the premium global appliance market whole?
That's the first question, yeah.
And second, and this is the part that is really bothering me as I'm digging through these recent dockets, why, at the absolute peak of their $6.4 billion power, are corporate insiders scrambling for the exits? Like, why is a company that's boasting record-high margins and a surging stock price simultaneously racing to rip its entire foundational supply chain out of the very country that built its empire?
It's the paradox of their current position. I mean, I am staring at these 2025 financial matrices, and the official corporate narrative being broadcast to Wall Street is entirely seamless.
Right, they're claiming a 30% year-over-year sales growth for 2024.
Exactly. The stock charts show this staggering upward trajectory. But when you bypass the executive summaries, when you actually start reading the footnotes and the risk disclosures, the margins are whispering a completely different reality.
Yeah, I'm seeing it here.
We are looking at class action lawsuits over millions of recalled physically dangerous units.
Millions.
We have devastating short seller reports alleging severe corporate governance violations. We have a suffocating debt load that was deliberately taken on just to buy their freedom from an Asian conglomerate.
The structural cracks beneath the billions are profound.
You really are. And to understand how a structure this large becomes this fragile, we have to start at the foundation. We have to go back to that Montreal ledger. Let's unearth the exact DNA of this operation.
Okay, tracing the origin back to 1994, I have the biographical data on the founder here, Mark Rosenzweig.
Right.
He returns home to Montreal and joins his family's business, Jolson Corp. They had been around since 1954, mostly selling sewing machines.
Family business.
Yeah. He comes in formally as a sales manager, but the internal notes and early interviews, they paint him as this obsessive tinkerer. He's at home, constantly taking apart basic cleaning appliances, trying to re-engineer them.
The language in these early biographical profiles is fascinating because it establishes the earnest origin myth that every single corporate behemoth requires.
The garage inventor myth.
Exactly. It says he was inventing ways to replace cheap sweepers and steamers because, let me read this quote, he wanted to actually disinfect with cleansing steam instead of relying on toxic chemicals.
Huh?
Goes on. Mark Rosenzweig's thoughts were that after a proper cleaning, a baby should safely be able to play on the kitchen floor free from toxins.
That's very good PR.
It frames the entire enterprise as a benevolent crusade for household safety. You know, the earnest tinkerer trying to protect families.
I'm looking at the revenue velocity here.
Yeah.
And that earnest tinkerer narrative, it just doesn't fully explain the math.
Not at all.
From that $1 million in 1996, I'm tracking the gross sales jumping to $100 million by the year 2000.
Look at that jump.
That is a 100x multiplier in just 4 years. You simply do not achieve that kind of geometric growth by slowly convincing local Canadian hardware stores to stock your new steam mop.
No, you don't.
So how do they actually achieve that distribution?
That is the pivotal question right there. If you look at the market dynamics of the late 90s, brick-and-mortar retail shelf space was a heavily guarded, almost impenetrable monopoly.
Right, the big box stores.
If you were a small company trying to get a new vacuum or steam cleaner into a Target, a Walmart, or a Sears, you were dealing with entrenched retail gatekeepers.
And those gatekeepers had decades-long relationships with legacy brands, Hoover, Bissell, Eureka.
Exactly. They demanded exorbitant slotting fees just to place your product on a bottom shelf in the back of the store. The Rosenzweigs realized early on that playing the traditional retail game was a death sentence for a company with no capital.
Right.
So they completely bypassed the gatekeepers. They took the product directly into the consumer's living room.
Direct response television. The infomercial.
Exactly. We tend to dismiss infomercials as late-night kitsch, but from a purely economic standpoint, it was a brilliantly subversive distribution model.
Because you control the whole environment.
You purchase cheap, off-peak media inventory, you demonstrate the exact value proposition of your hardware for 30 unbroken minutes, and you provide a direct mechanism for the viewer to purchase right there via a toll-free number.
There is no middleman dictating your shelf placement.
None.
There is no neighboring competitor product for the consumer to compare it against in that moment. It is pure, uninterrupted persuasion.
And Mark Rosenzweig himself was the face of these infomercials.
Right. He becomes this recognizable, energetic pitchman.
Yeah.
And that direct-to-consumer cash flow is what funded their initial geographical expansion.
Let's check the dates on that.
By 2003, the revenue data shows them hitting $250 million in annual sales. They relocate the corporate headquarters down to Needham, Massachusetts, to plant their flag in the American market.
Right.
And it's around this same time that the patent filings start showing up. I have patent 730366613 here, filed by Rosenzweig for a specific type of filter sensor.
But I want you to look closely at the product catalogs from that 2003 to 2006 window.
Okay, pulling those up.
This is where we need to identify a profound vulnerability in the company's early architecture. Despite hitting $250 million in sales, EuroPro was incredibly fragile.
Right.
Because the vast majority of what they were selling wasn't truly proprietary technology. They were essentially still an importer of outsourced generic designs manufactured in overseas factories.
So they didn't own the underlying tech.
Exactly. They were selling highly commoditized floor care tools. Think about it. If a competitor had managed to secure a cheaper manufacturing contract for a remarkably similar steam mop and bought up the same late-night television slots, EuroPro's entire empire could have evaporated overnight.
Because there's no moat.
They had no defensible economic moat. They were a marketing company, not an engineering powerhouse.
So when does that change? Because looking at the timeline, there is a massive inflection point. Right between 2007 and 2009, the branding shifts entirely.
Trace that shift for me.
In 2007, they officially launched the Shark brand. And the language they use in these early press releases, it's highly aggressive.
What did they say?
They introduce what they call proprietary, no loss of suction cyclonic vacuum technology.
No loss of suction cyclonic technology. We all know exactly whose territory they were invading with that specific phrasing.
Dyson.
Precisely. Up until that point, James Dyson had cultivated a near monopoly on the premium bagless vacuum market. He had spent years in R&D developing true cyclonic separation, and he was successfully convincing consumers to pay over $500 for a vacuum cleaner, which was unheard of at the time.
And then 2 years later, in 2009, EuroPro brings in a new president, Mark Barocas.
This is a huge shift.
Almost immediately under his tenure, they launched the Ninja brand, completely pivoting into the motorized kitchen appliance sector.
And look at how they targeted that market. They looked at the blender market and saw a massive bifurcation. Consumers were either buying a disposable $20 blender that would burn its motor out in a month.
Or they were financing a $500 Vitamix used in commercial kitchens.
Exactly. There was a massive empty middle ground.
I have a quote here from Mark Barocas discussing this specific era of expansion. And I want to read this because the corporate rhetoric is incredibly smooth, but I want you to help me reconcile with what was actually happening on the factory floor. He states, "We spent the past 5 years focused on building innovative products that deliver on our promise to positively impact people's lives."
Let's challenge that rhetoric immediately. I want you to cross-reference that benevolent phrasing with the internal competitive benchmarking files we have from that same year.
Okay, looking at the benchmarking.
This wasn't a philanthropic crusade to improve humanity. It was a calculated, aggressive, and frankly brilliant strategy of reverse engineering premium monopolies.
What do you mean?
They didn't start from scratch. They bought a $500 Dyson vacuum and a $500 Vitamix blender. They stripped those premium machines down to their studs.
Right, literally reverse engineering.
They analyzed the cyclonic airflow, they measured the motor wattage, they studied the blade geometry. Then they figured out how to replicate 90% of that premium performance using cheaper materials and highly optimized overseas manufacturing.
Allowing them to sell the resulting product for a fraction of the cost.
Exactly. They practically invented the modern accessible premium model.
So they weren't necessarily out-innovating Dyson on a pure physics level. They were out-engineering Dyson's price point.
Yes.
They matched the baseline premium specifications that consumers actually cared about, like suction power or blending speed, but then utilized their established massive infomercial media budgets to drive the narrative.
They controlled the demonstration.
Right. And as e-commerce began to rise, they aggressively cultivated 5-star user reviews to build an impenetrable wall of social proof.
And it worked flawlessly. By the end of 2009, gross sales pushed past $400 million.
But wait, as I am digging deeper into this folder of Barocas interviews, I'm uncovering a second quote here. And it seems to contradict everything they publicly claimed about quality.
Let me see that.
Listen to the specific language he uses here. It completely reframes the foundation of their engineering philosophy. Barocas states, "A great consumer product isn't great unless you can generate consumer demand. We're going to grow our business one 5-star review at a time."
Standard marketing speak.
But then, just a few sentences later, he adds this. "Our job is to put our products into retirement before their usable life. We develop 25 new ground-up products a year, every year."
I want you to let that sentence breathe for a moment, because it is the Rosetta Stone for understanding this entire company.
Put our products into retirement before their usable life.
Think about the terrifying implications of that philosophy. The corporate DNA of this company is explicitly built on planned obsolescence, masquerading as relentless innovation.
Right.
When James Dyson or the engineers at Vitamix built a machine in the 2000s, the goal was to build an heirloom appliance, something that would sit on your counter or in your closet for 20 years without failing.
SharkNinja's philosophy is the exact opposite.
They are intentionally designing machines meant to be replaced. When a CEO brags about developing 25 ground-up products a year, do the math on that timeline.
Let's see, 52 weeks in a year, 25 products. That means they're engineering, prototyping, manufacturing, and launching a completely new, highly complex consumer device roughly every 2 weeks.
The entire system isn't built on durability. It is built on sheer velocity, replacement, and fundamental disposability.
A new product every 2 weeks. That kind of velocity is something legacy brands operating out of Ohio or the UK simply couldn't comprehend, let alone match.
Which brings us to a crucial logistical problem. And the next stack of documents on the table covering the 2015 to 2017 timeline.
Right, because that kind of velocity requires an unimaginable amount of fuel.
Exactly.
If we follow the money, we see that by 2015, they pass $1.6 billion in annual revenue. They sign a massive 150,000 square foot lease for a new headquarters in Massachusetts.
And they officially discard the old EuroPro name.
Right, they completely rebrand the corporate entity as SharkNinja. They're clearly trying to unify this billion-dollar portfolio to look like a cohesive tech company.
But they hit a physical and logistical ceiling.
What kind of ceiling?
To sustain the launch of 25 new products a year, to maintain that aggressive, accessible premium pricing, and to expand into European and Asian markets simultaneously, You need infrastructure.
Right.
And a privately held, family-rooted business in Massachusetts simply does not possess that kind of infrastructure. You cannot prototype a complex robotic vacuum or a multifunction pressure cooker in a Boston suburb every 2 weeks.
So what's the solution?
They needed a massive infusion of institutional capital, and crucially, they needed dedicated, owned integration with offshore manufacturing.
I am pulling the buyout paperwork from 2017. Here it is, September 2017. A firm called CDH Private Equity steps in and acquires a 70% controlling stake in the holding company.
Look at the valuation.
The estimated valuation of that deal is $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
And following that acquisition, SharkNinja is aggressively restructured. They are absorbed and become a subsidiary of a massive Asian investment holding company called JS Global Lifestyle. I'm looking at the corporate structure charts here, and it's a profound shift in control.
This is the moment the ultimate conglomerate engine is fully assembled. I want you to connect the dots between what they had and what they bought.
Okay.
You take the ruthless direct-to-consumer marketing and consumer insight engine operating out of Boston, and you surgically graft it onto the absolute bleeding-edge, rapid prototyping and manufacturing infrastructure of Shenzhen and Suzhou in China.
Shenzhen is the hardware capital of the world.
The speed at which you can take a CAD drawing, mill a prototype, source the microchips, and spin up an assembly line is unmatched anywhere else on the planet.
Right.
This marriage is the only way a company can out-engineer legacy giants like Bissell or Tektronix Industries, the conglomerate that owns Hoover.
Because companies like Hoover operated on slow, traditional, multi-year research and development cycles?
Exactly. SharkNinja, now backed by the manufacturing might of JS Global, was taking a raw concept, prototyping it in Shenzhen, testing it, manufacturing 1 million units, and throwing them onto American retail shelves before Hoover's engineers even finished analyzing their first focus group data.
It is a terrifying masterclass in supply chain economics.
Yeah.
The results of that merger are immediate. Look at this.
What's the next product launch?
In 2018, utilizing that Chinese rapid prototyping speed, they launched the Ninja Foodie. They essentially pioneer an entirely new category, the multifunction pressure cooker that also acts as an air fryer.
It was a massive hit.
By 2019, JS Global Lifestyle has grown so powerful on the back of SharkNinja's Western sales that they executed an initial public offering on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange.
The global growth metrics are staggering.
But as I am sorting through these 2019 files, I am pulling a folder labeled Operational Restructuring.
Let's see that.
And this is where the sterile numbers on a spreadsheet suddenly collide with the human cost of this velocity.
What specific document are you looking at?
It is a WARN notice. The Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. The federal mandate that requires employers to provide advance notice of mass layoffs.
Look at the date.
The date on this filing is late 2019, stretching into February 2020. Amidst all this global scaling and billion-dollar IPO momentum, SharkNinja initiates targeted workforce reductions.
Where?
They lay off 110 employees at a distribution facility in Chino, California.
I want you to carefully consider the bitter irony of that exact timeline. December 2019 through February 2020.
Yeah.
Right as those 110 people in Chino are packing up their lockers, wondering how they're going to pay rent, the global pandemic is quietly taking hold.
Oh, wow.
Within a matter of weeks, the entire world goes into lockdown. And what happens to SharkNinja's business model when the entire global population is trapped inside their homes?
I'm looking at the 2020 financial records right now. It's an absolute explosion. Sales surged to an estimated $2.5 billion for the year.
Because the demand for home cleaning appliances, indoor cooking devices, and air purifiers skyrockets.
Right. People aren't eating out, so they're buying Ninja blenders and indoor grills. People are hyper-aware of sanitation, so they are buying Shark steam mops.
They even managed to enter the personal beauty sector that same year with the FlexStyle hair system, which becomes a viral sensation.
It forces you to pause and reflect on the cold, mechanical reality of corporate scaling. Those 110 employees in California weren't dismissed because the company was failing.
No.
They weren't dismissed because they did poor work. They were simply communities discarded in the relentless pursuit of supply chain optimization.
The algorithm driving the JS Global engine demanded leaner distribution logistics on the West Coast, right before the company experienced the greatest unforeseen financial windfall in its entire corporate history.
The disconnect between ground-level human stability and apex corporate momentum is jarring. The machine simply consumes what it needs and discards the rest to maintain velocity.
And that velocity was actively being weaponized against the established incumbents. Let's look at the competitor market share metrics from the 2020 to 2023 era.
Okay, pull in those files.
We mentioned Dyson earlier as their initial target. Look at these global figures from 2023.
Dyson, the absolute pioneer and gold standard of the premium vacuum, sold 15.8 million vacuum units globally that year.
Now look at SharkNinja.
SharkNinja, utilizing their reverse-engineered accessible premium model, sold 12.1 million units. They aren't just an annoying competitor anymore. They have closed the gap. They are systematically bleeding the giant.
But if you want to see the most brutal execution of their strategy, look at the displacement of iRobot. Pull the robotics market share files.
Right here, in 2021, iRobot, the makers of the Roomba, had an overwhelming 46% market share in North American robot vacuums. They were synonymous with the category.
They were the default standard.
What does SharkNinja do? They utilized that Shenzhen rapid prototyping to drop a robotic vacuum equipped with advanced LiDAR laser mapping navigation and a self-emptying base station.
And historically, those highly complex features were strictly gated behind iRobot's highest premium paywalls, often costing consumers $800 to $1,000.
SharkNinja brings all of that technology to market and sells it at a fraction of the flagship Roomba price.
I have the market analysis reports on the fallout of that pricing war. SharkNinja's downward pricing pressure was so aggressive, it didn't just steal market share, it severely destabilized iRobot's fundamental financial viability.
Because iRobot was forced to slash prices to compete, which destroyed their margins.
Exactly, and that bleeding balance sheet was a primary, direct contributor to the eventual collapse of iRobot's highly publicized multi-billion-dollar merger attempt with Amazon.
The regulators scrutinized it, but iRobot's deteriorating financials made the deal toxic.
SharkNinja didn't just beat a competitor. They fundamentally broke their competitor's corporate escape hatch.
In fact, the bleeding was so bad that in February 2024, CEO Mark Barocas actually had to issue a public denial to the press because rumors were swirling that SharkNinja was preparing to buy the shattered remains of iRobot for pennies on the dollar.
It is the ultimate victory of the accessible premium model. But this brings us to a massive, glaring contradiction in the evidence we have pinned to the board.
Contradiction.
If the 2017 merger with JS Global is what made SharkNinja an apex predator, if access to Chinese rapid prototyping is what allowed them to bleed Dyson and crush iRobot, then why am I looking at a Form F1 registration statement dated June 28, 2023?
Wait, an F1? A Form F1 is the SEC filing used by foreign issuers to register securities in the U.S.
Exactly. Why on earth are they intentionally spinning off from JS Global to list independently on the New York Stock Exchange? Why sever the umbilical cord to the very engine that gave them their superpower?
Let me trace the legal and geopolitical context hidden deep within these F1 disclosures. By late 2022, SharkNinja was generating over $3.7 billion in revenue.
They were the primary earner.
They were the undisputed primary growth engine for their entire Chinese parent company. But the macroeconomic world had drastically changed since the sunny days of the 2017 buyout.
What do the risk factors say?
I'm seeing heavy, repeated references in the risk factors section to Western geopolitical tensions. We're looking at the realities of crippling U.S. import tariffs on Chinese goods, the escalating trade war, and a rapidly slowing Chinese domestic economy that was dragging down JS Global's overall numbers.
Being intimately tied to a Hong Kong-listed holding company was no longer an asset for a company that made its money in America and Europe. It was creating a severe valuation drag.
Right. Wall Street wouldn't give them a premium multiple because the geopolitical risk of the Chinese parent entity was too high.
SharkNinja's Western market dominance was fundamentally misaligned with an Asian holding structure. They had to break free to unlock their true market cap.
So they decide to execute the escape hatch. They engineer a spin-off.
But I want you to look incredibly closely at the pre-IPO financial architecture detailed in the notes here, because independence rarely comes for free. Pull up the capital structure documentation from the weeks immediately preceding the spinoff.
Okay, pulling that up.
Before they officially separate, SharkNinja obtains a massive new corporate credit facility. I see an $810 million term loan alongside a $500 million revolving credit facility.
Right, I have the debt ledger right here. But wait, I'm looking at the disbursement of those funds. This doesn't make sense for a company preparing to go public.
Why not?
Usually, you take on debt to build factories or fund R&D, but this filing explicitly states that the loan proceeds resulted in a, quote, special cash distribution of $375 million to JS Global to repay outstanding legacy debt.
Verify the mechanics of that transaction. Read it again.
They took out hundreds of millions of dollars in brand new high-interest commercial debt from Western banks just to immediately turn around and pay a $375 million cash dividend back to their Chinese parent company right before they walked out the door.
It is the ultimate financial rug pull. It's an extraction of wealth. They successfully bought their freedom from JS Global, but JS Global ensured they extracted their pound of flesh on the way out.
SharkNinja strapped themselves with an immense, suffocating debt load to secure their independence.
By the end of 2023, immediately following the spinoff, their total debt load is sitting at roughly $810 million. The interest payments on that debt are staggering, driving their net income for the year down to just $167 million, despite billions in revenue.
They essentially paid a massive corporate ransom.
Yep.
On July 31st, 2023, the transaction is complete, and they commenced trading on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol SN. And if we step back and look at the market reaction as we move into the present day, 2024 and 2025, the illusion of perfection is blinding.
Wall Street loved the spinoff.
Just look at the Q4 2025 performance data.
The quarterly inflection matrix they provided to analysts is genuinely extraordinary for a hardware company.
It really is. In the fourth quarter of 2025 alone, they report $2.1 billion in net sales. Gross margins jumped to 49%.
49%.
The full year of 2025 hits that staggering $6.399 billion mark we talked about at the beginning.
And their aggressive entry into the beauty sector with the FlexStyle system is proving to be an absolute goldmine.
The beauty and home environment category grew by 63.2% year over year in that fourth quarter alone. They are riding such a high wave of cash flow that they even announced a $750 million share repurchase program in February 2026.
The stock is soaring.
The narrative is that they are an unstoppable force of consumer engineering.
But this is exactly where we need to act as investigators and refuse to accept the neat corporate narrative.
Why?
Because when a company is growing that fast with that much debt and operating on a philosophy of planned obsolescence, the underlying structure begins to buckle. Start pulling the recent legal dockets, the consumer litigation files, and the specialized analyst reports from the last 18 months. The 49% margins and the frantic operational pace are hiding severe, potentially catastrophic structural rot.
I am opening the folder on external financial scrutiny right now. I've got a major short seller report right here, published in August 2024 by Grizzly Research.
Right.
For those listening who might not be familiar, a short seller report is published by an investment firm that is actively betting against a company's stock. They dig up dirt, hoping to crash the price and profit from the fall.
But you have to listen to the specific severity of the allegations here.
The title of the report is, "We Believe SharkNinja is a China Hustle," based on rampant looting and conflicts of interest with the Chinese chairman.
Let that sink in.
The report alleges severe systemic corporate governance violations. Specifically, they claim that prior to the spinoff, SharkNinja sold a key subsidiary, which held the highly lucrative rights to their online storefronts on Chinese e-commerce giants, JD.com and Alibaba's Tmall, directly to its own chairman for only, quote, nominal consideration.
The short seller is pointing a spotlight directly at the financial gymnastics we noticed earlier regarding that $375 million dividend.
Yeah.
The report goes further, explicitly highlighting that SharkNinja aggressively increased its debt by over $300 million right before going public, utilizing complex related party loans and special dividends to funnel over $600 million back to the Asian parent entity and its executives.
So the picture Grizzly Research is painting isn't just about bad accounting. It is an accusation that the company's leadership systematically extracted foundational wealth from the entity at the direct expense of the new Western shareholders who are buying the IPO.
And the rot isn't confined to financial maneuvering in the boardroom. The reckless physical speed of releasing 25 new products a year is finally inevitably catching up to their quality control.
You cannot engineer a safe appliance in 2 weeks forever.
I'm opening the federal litigation dockets. Let's look at October 2023. There is a major consumer class action lawsuit filed over deceptive marketing regarding their Ninja Neverstick premium cookware, alleging the non-stick claims were entirely fabricated.
But more concerning is Zamani v. SharkNinja. This is a lawsuit alleging that their incredibly popular blenders suffer from a fundamental design defect.
Look at the details of that defect.
The plaintiffs claim the highly sharpened blades do not properly lock into the bases during use, creating an unreasonably dangerous appliance that can shatter or cause lacerations.
The Zamani case is highly revealing regarding their engineering culture. The court eventually dismissed the broader, nationwide deceptive marketing claims, but they allowed the individual product liability claims for the defective blades to proceed.
Think about the physical reality of what causes a defect like that. When you are rushing to engineer a high-torque motor and a complex blade assembly in a matter of weeks just to beat a competitor to a holiday retail window, the physical safety tolerances are the very first casualty.
You skip the long-term stress testing because the timeline demands it.
But the filing from May 15, 2025, is perhaps the most damaging evidence of this safety crisis. A massive class action lawsuit is initiated following the official government recall of 1.8 million Ninja Foodie pressure cookers.
Let me repeat that number. 1.8 million units recalled.
The defect. The lid can detach while the cooker is still pressurized, resulting in severe burn risks from boiling food and steam.
The lawsuit alleges they knew about the defect and failed to adequately warn consumers.
The accessible premium model, which relies on cheap manufacturing to undercut the competition, is suddenly looking incredibly expensive when you factor in the liability of millions of dangerous devices sitting in consumer kitchens.
Now, I want you to connect all of these disparate threads. We have an $810 million debt load. We have credible short seller allegations of insider looting. We have millions of recalled burn hazard appliances. And we have class action lawsuits over laceration risks.
All happening right beneath the surface.
Take all of that and cross-reference it with the insider trading disclosures. Pull the SEC filing from August 22nd, 2025.
I have the filing here. It's a prospectus for a secondary offering.
Yes. A secondary offering is when existing shareholders sell their privately held shares to the public market. Look at the timing and the actors involved.
Okay, looking at the table.
While the company is publicly reporting these record-high Q4 margins and initiating a $750 million stock buyback program, which is a classic maneuver to project extreme financial confidence and prop up the stock price, an upsized secondary offering of 5.5 million ordinary shares silently closes.
And who exactly is liquidating those shares?
Tell me.
I am reading the ownership table. It is C.J. Suning Wang, the chairman of the board of directors, the man who controls over 50% of the total voting power of the entire company.
The chairman.
He is utilizing this secondary offering to facilitate a massive personal liquidation of his equity.
The optics of that move are devastating. The chairman, who knows the internal state of the company better than anyone else on earth, is cashing out tens of millions of dollars at the exact moment the fundamental architecture of the company is under siege from lawsuits and short sellers.
He is running for the exit while telling the public everything is fine.
Which brings us to the final, most jarring piece of evidence in this entire investigation. The ultimate contradiction. Look at the supply chain resiliency notes, buried deep in the appendix of their most recent Form 10-K annual report.
Scanning the appendix now. Under geopolitical risks, it says the company is actively reshaping its global manufacturing footprint to mitigate reliance on any single region.
But look at the exact phrasing of the timeline.
It states, quote, with plans to shift approximately 90% of its U.S. volume out of China by the end of the second quarter of 2025. And nearly all by the close of 2025.
I really need you to understand the sheer scale of the panic embedded in that single sentence. The entire reason SharkNinja evolved from a $1 million Canadian importer into a $6.4 billion global juggernaut was their deep, intrinsic integration into the Chinese rapid prototyping and manufacturing ecosystem.
Right. That infrastructure was the engine that allowed them to launch 25 products a year.
It was the sole mechanism that let them underprice Dyson and bankrupt iRobot. It was their ultimate defining competitive advantage.
And now, driven by the terror of impending tariffs, geopolitical fracturing, and the need to distance themselves from their Asian roots for Wall Street's sake, they are frantically trying to rip 90% of their entire U.S. supply chain out of China in a matter of months.
They're attempting to run away from the very physical infrastructure that built their empire without interrupting their revenue flow. It is like trying to change the engines on a jet plane while it is flying at Mach 2.
So, summarizing the final metrics we have on the table before us, we are looking at a $6.399 billion company. They employ 4,143 people globally.
They are an empire built on an undeniably ingenious, accessible premium model currently sitting at the absolute apex of the appliance world.
Yet, simultaneously, their leadership is cashing out. Their debt is towering, their products are facing massive safety recalls, and they are scrambling to completely re-architect their foundational supply chain before geopolitics or catastrophic quality control failures finally catch up to their breakneck velocity.
Looking at all this evidence, it forces you to consider the alternate paths, the what-ifs of corporate history. What if Mark Rosenzweig and Mark Barocas had never signed that deal with CDH Private Equity and merged with JS Global in 2017?
What if they had decided to remain a mid-sized, privately held, family-rooted company in Massachusetts, content with a few hundred million in sales?
If they had chosen that path, they certainly would have avoided the crippling pre-IPO debt they currently shoulder. They wouldn't be facing the existential terror of a frantic geopolitical supply chain panic today.
They wouldn't be defending themselves against short sellers accusing them of an international hustle.
That is true. But we also have to acknowledge that the market reality of the 2010s was utterly ruthless. If they hadn't taken the Faustian bargain of Chinese hyper-manufacturing, if they hadn't chosen to scale at all costs, they likely would have been slowly crushed by Dyson's sustained dominance in the premium sector.
Or even more likely, they would have been entirely out-innovated and erased by massive tech conglomerates like Samsung and LG. Those giants currently hold 15% of the cordless vacuum market.
And they have the capital to heavily integrate advanced AI and robotics into their premium lines without breaking a sweat. In the modern hardware market, SharkNinja faced a binary choice. They had to achieve massive scale, or they had to die. They chose scale.
They chose scale. And it draws an unavoidable, sobering parallel to other hardware darlings we've analyzed over the past decade. Think about companies like Peloton or GoPro.
Exactly. These were entities that prioritized relentless breakneck growth and the massive rapid capture of market share over fundamental sustainable stability.
They rode macroeconomic surges, just like SharkNinja rode the pandemic boom to $2.5 billion in 2020.
But eventually, inevitably, the velocity outpaces the engineering. The marketing outpaces the quality control. The question moving forward isn't whether SharkNinja can continue to invent clever new product categories or ride the wave of a viral beauty tool.
The real question is whether they can outrun their own internal rot. Can they rebuild their supply chain in Vietnam or Mexico fast enough to survive the collapse of their Chinese foundation? This has been Project Blackwood.
When a company's entire DNA is based on putting their own products into retirement as fast as possible, what happens when they run out of things to replace? Except themselves.